You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome to On the Money, your daily weekday dose of economics, business and consumer news. I'm Liam Halligan, and for the next hour we'll be talking about oil prices, about Joe Biden's attempt to lower global crude costs by tapping America's strategic oil reserve. And we'll discuss the impact of that new COVID variant, Omicron, on financial markets and the broader global economy. It's a jam-packed show today, so stay with us. But first, it's the GB News headlines with Rosie Wright.
Thank you, Liam. I'm Rosie Wright. This is your news at 1 o'clock. 9 cases of the COVID Omicron variant have now been detected in the UK, with 6 cases identified in Scotland. The Scottish First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, says there's no evidence that community transmission of the variant is sustained or widespread, but there's still cause for concern.
The number of mutations that it has and the nature of these, and some of the very early indications from southern Africa, have raised the concern that this variant might be more transmissible than Delta, which of course is currently the dominant variant in Scotland and many other countries. There is no doubt that this presents potentially the most challenging development in the course of the pandemic for quite some time.
Well, meanwhile, the World Health Organization has warned the variant has an unprecedented number of spike mutations, and that could impact the trajectory of the pandemic. Well, the Director General also says South Africa shouldn't be punished for making the discovery.
The emergence of the highly mutated Omicron variant underlines just how perilous and precarious our situation is. South Africa and Botswana should be thanked for detecting, sequencing and reporting this variant, not penalized. Omicron's very emergence is another reminder that although many of us might think we're done with COVID-19, it's not done with us.
Well, the UK, the EU and US were quick to impose travel restrictions after the variant was identified in South Africa. The country's president, Cyril Ramaphosa, criticised the move as unjustified and unscientific. Currently, the Cardiff and Munster rugby teams are stranded in South Africa, isolating after some squad members tested positive for COVID. Now, in other news, Labour has confirmed Sir Keir Starmer is reshuffling his front bench, despite the deputy leader earlier saying she wasn't aware of any such plans. Shadow Cabinet member Kat Smith has announced she's resigning and she'll be returning to the backbenches. She also tweeted a letter warning of the damage caused by the failure to readmit former leader Jeremy Corbyn to the party. An Insulate Britain protester who's been on hunger strike in prison is now receiving hospital treatment. Emma Smart from Weymouth in Dorset had been moved to hospital wing at HMP Bronzefield in Surrey, having not eaten for the past 13 days. She was jailed for 4 months on the 17th of November for breaching an injunction. She vowed to stop eating until the government pledges to insulate homes. A teenager has been remanded in custody after appearing in court, charged with the murder of a 12-year-old girl in Liverpool. Ava White was stabbed in the city centre last Thursday and died from what police described as catastrophic injuries. The 14-year-old boy, who can't be named for legal reasons, was also charged of being in possession of a blade. The sex trafficking trial of Ghislaine Maxwell is set to begin in New York City today. The British socialite denies recruiting teenagers for Jeffrey Epstein to sexually abuse from 1994 to 2004. She's been in a US jail since her arrest in July last year. Court documents suggest Maxwell will claim the alleged victims may have false or distorted memories. Network Rail has issued a warning after teenagers were caught on CCTV doing handstands on a level crossing. The incident took place in Broxtowe in Nottinghamshire on a track used by trains travelling up to 80 miles per hour. Police say the girls showed a blatant disregard for their own safety and others. Several other people were filmed standing or lying down on the track to take photographs. Manchester United have appointed Ralph Rangnick as the new interim manager. He takes the reins until the end of the season with a 2-year consultancy deal to follow. First team coach Michael Carrick has been caretaker in charge for 2 matches since Ole Gunnar Solskjaer was sacked just over a week ago. You are right up to date. I'll have the latest headlines for you in half an hour. For now, back to On the Money with Liam.
And this is On the Money. Now, oil prices recently went above $80 a barrel. Expensive fuel costs are part of the reason the cost of living has been soaring in the UK, US, across Europe and elsewhere. But as OPEC prepares to meet later this week, US President Joe Biden's taking on the powerful exporters cartel, releasing millions of barrels of oil onto global markets in a bid to keep prices down. We'll be discussing if Biden's power move might backfire. Plus, every day On the Money features an in-depth Money Talks interview with a business leader or policy maker. Today, we're talking to Francis Hellier, a technologist who changed theatre tickets forever. That's later in the show. And as ever, I want your questions, opinions, suggestions. What should On the Money be covering? This is your show too, so get in touch. Email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet @gbnews. We read all your emails and tweets. We'll read out some of the best ones later in the show, so stay with us. This is GB News. I'm Liam Halligan, and you're On the Money. Now, if you listen to the great and the good at the recent COP26 summit, you'd think that the world was about to stop using crude oil altogether. And as with so much that we heard during that Glasgow Gabfest, beyond the posturing and virtue signalling, real life is actually rather more complex. During lockdown and its aftermath, the world economy was on go slow, of course, using less crude oil to fuel cars, lorries, ships, planes and power stations. But earlier this month, global oil use quietly returned to pre-pandemic levels. That is 100 million barrels each and every day. That's 1 followed by 8 zeros. Now, a barrel of oil is around 158 litres or 280 pints. So according to my back-of-the-envelope calculation, if you put 100 million barrels of oil into pint glasses and stack them, the glasses tower will be more than 11 times the distance to the moon. That's how much crude we use every single day. And there's no sign of oil demand falling or even ceasing to grow anytime soon. At the start of 2020, oil prices fell from around $60 to $20 on average a barrel. With airlines everywhere grounded and much industrial production shuttered, demand for the black stuff was extremely slow. But as the economy has reopened, oil prices have surged back above $80 a barrel, a 7-year high. That's a big reason the cost of living has been spiralling, with petrol and diesel now costing upwards of £1.50 a litre. In the United States, the price of petrol or gasoline is of huge political significance. As Americans took to the road for Thanksgiving last week, the price of filling up was higher than recent years, and Republican activists, keen to undermine Democrat President Joe Biden ahead of midterm elections next November, have been keen to pin blame for rising energy prices on the White House. They've been placing stickers on fuel pumps across America, with a grinning Joe Biden saying, "I did that," pointing to the fuel price. Republicans accuse Biden of mismanaging the economy while allowing the US central bank to keep printing money, which they blame for soaring oil prices. It was against this backdrop that Biden last week announced one of the biggest ever releases from the US Strategic Petroleum Reserve, with America attempting to lower oil prices by putting more crude onto global markets. The US has coordinated that move with other oil importers, including China, Japan, and the United Kingdom, to release oil in storage in a bid to bring prices down. But the trouble is that the Organisation of Petroleum Exporting Countries doesn't want the US calling the shots. The OPEC exporters cartel, dominated by Saudi Arabia, remains hugely powerful. Its 10 members control almost 40% of global oil production and 80% of oil reserves. Add in Russia, which collaborates with OPEC members, and this OPEC Plus grouping controls half of global oil production and almost 90% of reserves. So OPEC is still very seriously powerful. It won't be dictated to by the US, China, or anyone else. Biden's attempt to flood oil markets is naive and ill-judged, it seems to me. The 50 million barrels of strategic reserves to be released over several months amounts to just half the oil the world uses in a single day. During that COP26 jolly, Western leaders signed us all up to costly decarbonisation targets involving fewer fossil fuels. But at the same time, they were begging OPEC to pump more oil and Vladimir Putin's Russia to send more gas. And now, while fears of Omicron are pushing oil prices down, fears of a broader shortage, fears fuelled by Joe Biden's rash move, are pushing the cost of oil back up. Crude prices surged around 5% this morning, amid concerns that when OPEC meets later this week, they could take countermeasures to keep prices rising by refusing to increase production. So that's our on-the-money question today. To kick off the week, has Joe Biden provoked OPEC to keep oil prices high? As regular viewers know, On the Money is all about grown-up, in-depth conversations with people who really know their stuff. And today, it's a pleasure to be joined by David Fife, Chief Economist at the global intelligence provider Argos. In the studio, we have Steve McNamara, ex-cabbie and a General Secretary at the Licensed Taxi Drivers Association. Don't let anyone tell you we don't bring you a range of guests here on The Money. And also in the studio is friend of the show and On the Money regular, the CEO of Blonde Money, Helen Thomas. David Fife, let's go to you first. Thank you so much for joining us on The Money. Of course, Argos Media Group, Petroleum Argos. You guys, you're analysts, you've been analysing oil markets for decades and decades. You are very much the best in the business, in my view. What do you think's going on in terms of the response to Joe Biden's move to try and bring oil prices down ahead of this OPEC summit?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've pointed out that the Biden administration was probably a little bit shocked that in the immediate aftermath of announcing their action with a number of other consuming countries, the price actually went up by $4 or $5 a barrel. Now, of course, you can argue that was a sort of sell the rumor, buy the fact type phenomenon. The market had been weakening since the Biden administration started talking about the SBR release. But of course, the run-up in prices last Tuesday was really precisely as you've suggested, because there were fears that this would cause some sort of retaliation from the producers group OPEC Plus that is meeting on Thursday to decide on its production policy for January. There has been some speculation that they would pause their return of oil to the market. I'm not entirely sure they will. I suspect because there's so much uncertainty in the market at the moment around the Omicron variant, which did see prices collapse on Friday. I suspect they may well stick with the plan and carry on increasing supply to the market, unless it becomes apparent that Omicron is much more serious than people are talking about at the moment.
Helen, when I thought of this subject this morning, you came into my mind. This is core blonde money territory, isn't it? This is where economics, finance and politics and geopolitics collide.
Yeah, absolutely. On this particular issue, you're absolutely right, because on the one hand, there's the geopolitics of, frankly, when we're talking about what could be a war, could get that far, but certainly a trade-off, a spat. If you're thinking about who's going to win, then it's about their geopolitical muscle, isn't it? Because the thing about OPEC Plus, and it's very interesting to see your charts there, they don't always get on with each other.
They don't.
Russia has famously often walked out of those meetings.
That's why Russia isn't a member of OPEC.
Well, indeed.
It likes to plough its own furrow, but it often comes in behind OPEC, doesn't it, to restrict supply or increase supply as the exporters' cartel dictates.
Yes, and but overarching all of this is the economic outlook now, far more uncertain. Well, people think this is very uncertain. Personally, I think it's very certain.
Go on.
Economic growth is going to be lower than would otherwise be the case. That is a given. Whatever the truth of the variant is, and I'm very happy to go into why, but we can do it later. I know we're talking about oil right now. But look, when I tell you economic growth is going to be lower, that is going to change the calculus, both for OPEC, as we were just hearing there, and for Joe Biden, who is in trouble because his approval ratings are dropping quite rapidly, aren't they?
So you reckon whatever the reality of Omicron, the panic and the media hyperbole and the hype and everything will mean that investment will be hit, economic growth will be lower, whatever the clinical reality?
Yes, and the political response, because here's the problem. The mathematics of this virus mean you don't know until it's too late when it's gone exponential.
Yeah.
You've got to act early. But if you act early and you shut everything down and perhaps upset the economy for no reason, that's the other trade-off. But what have we seen time and again from our leaders? What does public opinion seem to want? It wants action. So I think there will be more restrictions, whatever the truth of the science, whatever happens with the virus.
Steve, Helen's sketched out a vision of the future where the economy might be slower because of Omicron, and that you would think would mean oil prices would come back, so petrol, diesel prices at the forecourt would be lower. But for now, £1.50 a litre diesel, it's pretty expensive for the cabbies, right?
Look, it's affecting everything. It's not just affecting us. Our fuel prices are up nearly 20% from the start of the pandemic. But the economy is booming. I mean, in London at the moment, it's absolutely everything. I've just got off an absolutely ram-packed tube after I waited 10 minutes for a cab. I couldn't get a cab.
Even you? Crikey. Hold on. That's a bigger story than what we're doing. Steve McNamara can't get a cab.
London is absolutely booming. And you know, Helen says that we may be seeing, you know, a more political reaction to the Omicron. I mean, I sincerely hope we don't. I just cannot foresee another lockdown, or London has recovered so well, everybody's doing so well, and I mean the big issue is, please, you know, can it stop at wearing masks? I mean, we don't need anything further. I mean, if we do have to lock down again, what that really tells us is that the whole vaccine thing has been a failure, because, you know, why are we bothering?
Let's go back to you, David, and just refocus the conversation on the oil price, which is your specialism. We've seen big swings, haven't we? A 10% drop on Friday, a recovery this morning as Omicron perhaps isn't as serious as we originally thought. What do you think is going to happen to the oil price for the rest of the year and into 2022? I know it's a tough question, but if anyone's going to have a view, it's you.
No, I mean, we've you know, you're a contributor on the economic and financial markets. I would agree absolutely. Even before the Omicron variant emerged at the end of last week, our expectations were that the global economy growth was likely to soften a little bit next year. We've got other things going on aside from COVID-19. We've got the Chinese economy, which is facing headwinds. We've got inflationary pressures, which are at play. So our view for the crude market was that it's likely to remain relatively tight, prices relatively high over the course of the winter. Some people are switching out of natural gas into oil, so demand looks relatively robust over the winter. But potentially from about the second quarter of next year onwards, we would very much see crude trading much closer to $70 a barrel than recent sort of $80 plus levels. So our view very much accords with your contributor who sees a bit of a softening in economic activity in 2022.
Does that chime with you, Helen? So oil prices staying pretty high over the winter, over peak usage in the northern hemisphere as we're all heating our homes, but then getting slightly softer in the spring and into summer.
Well, I take you back to last year. I mean, one of the most astonishing things, of course, was that oil traded negative. Not that long ago.
Because the storage costs were bigger than the cost of getting it out the ground.
Exactly, and we might want to go back to the view from the taxi driver, because even when oil was basically negative, petrol prices and diesel prices were still pretty high, weren't they?
Someone was making some money.
As they always are.
We've never understood it, and perhaps your contributors can advise. The price of diesel, the price of oil, crude oil, goes down to $20 a barrel, and yet the price of petrol and diesel stays roughly the same. It never ever seems to drop correspondingly.
And yet when oil prices go up the next day or even the day before on the forecourt prices. Why is that, Steve?
The fuel is already in the tank at the petrol station, and the guy goes out and changes the price. How does that work?
But, we talk a lot here about inflation on this show, don't we? And we laugh about this concept of transitory. But one of my... this buzzword that all the central banks
that inflation won't hang around.
Yeah, but what we saw last year, supply chopped off, demand comes back in the next year, and over this period, with the Omicron fears, etc., I see demand coming back off, which is going to weigh on oil prices and other prices as well. And in 12 months' time, I believe we will be lower again, and that inflation will have come down. But as we're hearing, does not always translate into what the consumer gets. Not just in
with gas, electricity, with everything.
All of them, exactly. Because, companies have to make money, don't they? And they will tell us we had a terrible 18 months. We've got to do even more. Always, always.
Well, look, we do talk a lot about inflation on this show, not least because our surveys of viewers show us that cost of living is right up there among the most important things to GB News viewers. We'll carry on doing that. Steve, thanks a lot for joining us. Steve McNamara, General Secretary of the London Licensed Taxi Drivers Association. Helen, you're going to stay with us because we're going to be talking financial markets later. And thanks so much to David Fife of Media, Argos Media, experts on oil and commodity prices there. Really appreciate you all joining me for that important discussion. You're watching On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. Up next, the Omicron variant sent shockwaves through the global stock markets last week as share prices plunged on fears of a renewed lockdown and the impact of that on our economy. On Friday, the FTSE 100, the main index of UK-based shares, suffered its biggest fall in 18 months. But is the initial anxiety now easing? There's been a tentative bounce back this morning. But is it enough to be positive about the coming weeks and months for the health of financial markets and our economy? Could renewed COVID fears cause markets to crash? Stay with us. We'll be discussing all that and more. You're on the money.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. It's cold out there. It will be warmer by tomorrow. Most having a dry day today, but there is some wet weather across northwest England, Northern Ireland, and particularly western Scotland, created by this weather front. But it is a warm front, so it is slowly but surely going to introduce milder air. However, out there today, as you probably know, it is pretty cold, despite quite a bit of sunshine across eastern England. One or two showers grazing Norfolk, but they're clearing away. The cloud will continue to increase over the Midlands, and we'll see some drizzly rain on the west coast of Wales, the coast of northwest England, and particularly wet across western Scotland. Some snow likely for a time here over the hills as the breeze picks up. It is a cold day, though, but it is starting to turn milder in the northwest. We may reach double figures late in the day. That rain will continue to track southwards. A bit of snow still mixed in for a time, but turning more to rain as the milder air arrives. Now, before that mild air arrives, there will be a touch of frost through this evening across parts of the south, but by morning time, the milder air is much across the UK and temperatures will be well above freezing to start Tuesday. It will be a grey start, a fairly dank, drizzly, misty kind of day. The rain fairly persistent across northern and western Scotland. Rain on and off for Northern Ireland, northwest England too. Further south, not much rain, but staying fairly grey for most of the day. But it will, as I said, be an awful lot milder than it is out there today. Temperatures widely up to double figures. Notice some heavier rain coming up to the northwest later on in the day, and the winds picking up as well. That rain will spread across Scotland and Northern Ireland during tomorrow evening, before a band of rain swings across England and Wales during Tuesday night. And that will then reintroduce colder air later this week. So the weather chopping and changing somewhat. We should see some good spells of sunshine, especially on Thursday, but it will be colder by then, before perhaps turning milder again on Friday.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back, you're on the money. Now, it's been a turbulent few days for the economy, and over the weekend, 3 cases of the COVID variant Omicron were detected in the UK. Reacting to the new variant on our shores, Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced tougher new measures in a bid to slow down the spread. Today, Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon held a press conference and called for the public to redouble their efforts in the fight against this virus. And the Chief Medical Officer for Wales, Dr Frank Atherton, has said it's only a matter of time before the COVID Omicron variant reaches the country. And Northern Ireland's Health Minister Robin Swan is preparing to update the Assembly on measures being deployed to tackle the Omicron variant. Now, these fears over this new form of COVID have been impacting financial markets. On Friday, European share indices fell around 5% on average, a significant drop, with financial markets hitting a 7-week low. And on so-called Black Friday, that was on so-called Black Friday, a day which is supposed to give the economy a consumer-driven boost. This morning, though, the fog of media hyperbole has started to clear, and the message of the World Health Organization and others that symptoms of Omicron are actually, and I quote, rather mild, is starting to break through. As such, financial markets have indeed bounced back this morning. Well, Helen Thomas is still with me to discuss this, and I'm delighted to say so is another friend of the show, Victoria Scholar from Interactive Investor. She'll be joining us down the line very soon. So, Helen, what do you make of this sort of boing, boing, yo-yoing of financial markets in response to really this kind of latest spin on this new variant?
Well, I think we have two things going on here, which is that the financial markets were already up at massive highs. They've had a huge rally because there's been so much intervention since all of this kicked off. All the money that's been printed, all the furlough, all the tax breaks, etc. All of that's been ploughed in. So we were already at very high levels. Then something comes along reminding us this virus will be with us for years. We still have the Spanish flu, by the way. It's still around.
From 1918.
From 1918. It's just not as...
Even though it wasn't Spanish, it started in Kansas. But
Exactly.
anyway, that's a different story.
South Africa might be pleased to hear you talk about that today. Exactly. It's going to be around with us for a while. And therefore, what we have to square off is the value of where the markets are. Does that line up with the outlook for the economy? Now, if people are still listening and were listening earlier on in the show, hopefully they are.
Of course they are. More
Of course they are.
We're building our audience by the second.
Of course. So they will know that my suspicion is economic growth is therefore going to be lower than would otherwise be the case. I just want to pick you up because I think we talked about restrictions coming in. It's not just what the politicians do, it is normal human behaviour, right? Some people, understandably, very scared. We don't know enough. We don't even know if it evades the vaccine, which is the big question, of course. Even if it's mild, that might upset people. So normal human behaviour now will be, hang on, do I want to go to the Christmas party? There might be offices saying, actually, do you know what, let's not risk it.
Do I want to go for that mini break? Do I want to take that holiday?
You might take the holiday and get stuck out there. Maybe that's better than being in cold Britain. But either way, we've heard this story. People are understandably going to be a little bit more cautious. That's going to weigh on growth, whatever the truth of this variant is. So it's not just about the actual restrictions, it's about behaviour. And when it comes to financial markets, of course, they've been bailed out time and time and time again. They have their own behavioural response. They are going to have to learn and realise, first of all, things don't look so good, and all that help, it's not going to be there.
Even if you haven't got stocks and shares, even if you don't buy into financial markets, of course, the entire economy is affected by the mood on the street, and that mood music really is dictated by financial markets. And if financial markets get walloped and correct, as we say, rather scientific language for a very human phenomenon, then, of course, that affects everything, doesn't it? It affects the jobs market, it affects the broader economy. And it strikes me, Helen, that over the weeks to come, there's so much going on that could drag financial markets in different directions. You've got all that government stimulus, as you say, all that central bank money printing, all that borrowing of money by the state, lots and lots of government spending. I'd say this new variant's likely to increase that. I'd say, I don't know if you agree, that because of fears over this variant, it's now less likely than a week ago that interest rates are going to rise. I think central banks will stick with emergency measures, money printing, ultra-low rates, using this new variant not as an excuse but as a reason.
Well, this is the crux of the question for these next few weeks, actually, is because we keep talking about inflation and central banks responding to that. Now we've got lower growth. How are they going to respond to that? So I think they will not do as much stimulus as they've done before. And more importantly, what are the politicians going to do? We've been sat here, I've come in many times to talk about Rishi Sunak.
I can't get rid of you.
I know! Rishi Sunak is obsessed with getting that debt pile down. We've heard it, taxes are going up, massive tax burden. So how is he going to square that? Are we going to have another furlough scheme? Massively important questions here the government have to deal with.
So many issues swirling around, and who can untangle this morass of ideas for us? Oh, it must be Victoria Scholar. There she is from Interactive Investor. Victoria, good to see you as ever. It's been a real roller coaster ride on financial markets in recent days. Friday compared to today. I mean, it seems like the markets are going in completely different directions.
Absolutely. We saw a massive sell-off across global markets on Friday that dragged the FTSE 100 down by more than 3%, its worst day in 16 months. You've been talking about the oil market as well, where the pain was really laid bare with oil prices down by as much as 13%. Now the weekend's passed and it feels as though there's a sense that the sell-off was overdone. Part of the reason why is because volumes were low on Friday because we had the Thanksgiving holiday in the US on Thursday. So a lot of traders and investors were away on Friday. So that might have exacerbated some of the moves. And also what we're learning so far about the new COVID cases is that most of them have been quite mild. So there is a feeling that some of that selling on Friday was overdone, but we're still a lot lower than where we were on Thursday.
It's worth saying, Victoria, isn't it? Just reiterating a point that we made, Helen and I, when we were talking that even if you don't own stocks and shares, these discussions that we're having about financial markets, they impact everyone, don't they? Whether or not you own shares in companies.
Yeah, and I think that the stock market is almost a forward-looking barometer of the strength of the economy because, we look at businesses and how well they're doing. That impacts employment, that impacts GDP, it impacts inflation as well. So it's very interlinked. It also impacts the value of the pound, which affects the costs of our imports and our exports, and most importantly, our holidays.
Victoria, hold that thought because we're going to take this discussion over the break with both you and Helen. If you can give us just a few more minutes of your time. You're watching On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. Coming up, there'll be today's Money Talks interview, our in-depth discussion feature. We'll be talking with the creator of the first ever theatre online ticketing services, London Theatre Direct. The company's been around for a while, but it's a very, very interesting story. Francis Hellier will tell me how this hugely successful company got off the ground with just one laptop between the two co-founders. But before that, let's get a GB News update with Rosie Wright.
Good afternoon, I'm Rosie Wright. Here are the latest headlines. 9 cases of the COVID Omicron variants have now been detected in the UK, with 6 cases identified in Scotland. The Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon says there's no evidence that community transmission is sustained or widespread, but there still is cause for concern.
The number of mutations that it has and the nature of these, and some of the very early indications from southern Africa have raised the concern that this variant might be more transmissible than Delta, which of course is currently the dominant variant in Scotland and many other countries. There is no doubt that this presents potentially the most challenging development in the course of the pandemic for quite some time.
Labour has confirmed a front-bench reshuffle is underway, despite the Deputy Leader, Angela Rayner, saying she wasn't aware of any such plans. Shadow Cabinet member Kat Smith has announced she's resigning and returning to the backbenches. She also tweeted a letter warning of the damage caused by the failure to readmit former leader Jeremy Corbyn to the party. The sex trafficking trial of Ghislaine Maxwell is due to begin today in New York City. The British socialite denies recruiting teenagers for Jeffrey Epstein to sexually abuse from 1994 to 2004. She's been held in a US jail ever since her arrest in July last year. Network Rail has issued a warning after teenagers were caught on CCTV doing handstands on a level crossing. The incident took place in Broxtowe in Nottinghamshire on a track used by trains travelling up to 80 miles per hour. Police say they showed a blatant disregard for their own safety and others. You are up to date here on GB News. I'll have more on all of today's top stories in half an hour.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. You're on the money with me, Liam Halligan. We're discussing the impact of the Omicron variant on financial markets. Friend of the show, Helen Thomas, CEO of Blonde Money. She's still with me, as is another friend of the show, an On the Money regular, Victoria Scholar, who joins us down the line. Victoria, so you're head of investment at Interactive Investor. You're looking at financial markets all the time. What do you think is going to happen in the spring and summer next year? I know it's a very, very difficult question, but financial markets have been overvalued in the view of many people for a long time. And now with this new variant, perhaps much slower economic growth than we were expecting, maybe the markets might correct.
I think that there's no doubt that there are a series of potential headwinds ahead for the markets, not least from inflation, like you say, and also the potential for another demand shock if Omicron turns out to be very serious and our vaccinations don't work that well. The difficult thing with markets is that in the US, for example, we've been seeing continuous all-time highs over a number of years now, and you could have said 3 years ago that markets were overpriced, that they were overvalued, and you would have missed out on all these gains. So that's what analysts and investors are trying to digest right now. Given the sell-off on Friday, is this an opportunity to buy the dip, or are we set for further selling? And all this depends on the progression of this new mutation, how serious it is. And I know you were talking about the Bank of England before. I think what's interesting is the fact that they didn't move last month. And what will happen if there is this demand shock? Where will they go? They're not going to have that monetary stimulus buffer in order to support the economy at a time that we might really, really need it.
Yeah, when interest rates are 0.1%, you can't really go much further down, can you? Helen, you specialise in the interaction between politics and financial markets. So let me put this to you. You and indeed Victoria, you were both members of the budget panel when GB News did our first budget coverage at the end of October. In that budget, Rishi Sunak assumed 6.5% growth this year and 6% next year. We warned it might not happen. It almost definitely won't happen now, right?
I believe it was extremely optimistic then and certainly is not going to happen, absolutely. And that was always the risk. And this is the strange thing I think has been going on at the Treasury, is it's actually been perhaps a bit too political, not enough economic. You know, look, I've been on both sides of that, right? So I understand the political calculations, but I also have my eyes open to what's going on in the economy. We know that Boris and Rishi have their eyes on the next election, and we believe the idea is you raise taxes now, you try and get the debt down, and you cut taxes into an election. Great. But what's that, is it Muhammad Ali quote? It's a great plan until you get punched in the face.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a problem with plans.
Yeah.
You know, you've got to then be able to flip to a next plan and make it work. And they're going to get themselves in all sorts of knots without being able to respond in that way. So I think, look, it's a given they cannot respond as they did last year. They won't.
Yeah, you used to work for George Osborne when he was Shadow Chancellor. You've worked at the pinnacle of politics in this country. Yeah, the obvious statement to make is that if growth isn't 6% and 6.5% like Rishi Sunak is relying on in all his budget calculations, then there's going to be a huge hole in the national accounts. That means less government spending than expected, more tax than expected, which is going to slow down the economy even more.
Well, this is where you end up backing yourself into a corner. You cannot govern by spreadsheet. You have to govern by people and how people respond. And to me, the biggest miscalculation anyone has made, whether it's markets or politicians, is fear casts a very long shadow. This is going to have an impact for a decade.
They've overdone the fear, you reckon?
Yeah.
And that will have serious economic implications. And we're seeing these now, because even if they say now, Omicron, it's quite mild. And indeed, we had one of the scientists who who did the sequencing on GB News over the weekend, and she was saying we're overdoing the fear, and yet the government doesn't seem to be dialing back on the fear.
Well, of course, they've got the issue of if they dial back and we mix too much, it'll go around more, and then it might cause problems to the health service. I mean, it is, to be fair, a complicated situation, and they've needed a lot of compliance, and you've heard Chris Whitty talk about how he's upset that may not continue. But it's not even really about the politicians, it's about people. People have already changed their behaviour, they've already changed their habits, shopping online, all these things that maybe they'd never do before. This is just saying...
The great retirement, people not going to work 5 days a week. No. Are civil servants ever going to go back 5 days a week? Probably not.
No, exactly. Are people going to commute? No, none of these things. You know, we're going to live in the metaverse eventually, etc.
Just last word to Victoria Scholar. Victoria, what do you think financial markets will make of the fact that we're not going to grow at 6% next year, like Rishi Sunak said that we would?
I think what markets like the least is uncertainty, and that's essentially what we've got right now with Omicron. We don't know whether this is going to transpire into something that is relatively contained and won't have massive reverberations for markets and indeed the economy, or it could go the other way. So that's what markets will be focused on. It's this uncertainty, and that's what's creating the jitteriness. That's why we saw this massive move to the downside on Friday, and I wouldn't be surprised to see more movements to the downside as well before year end, because a lot of fund managers and investors will have locked in good gains year to date. And now there's a lot of certainty heading into the final holiday month of the year. So we could see some selling of assets as investors lock in those gains and secure those year to date profits and take away that uncertainty of December.
Strap yourself in, folks. It could be a bumpy ride. Victoria Scholar, as ever. Helen Thomas, delighted to have both of you on the show. Lots of you have been emailing us on oil prices and the effects of the Omicron variant on financial markets, on oil. Mark says it's obvious that the oil companies are going to milk us out of every penny from now on. Due to the West aggressively pushing a green agenda, costs will stay as high as they can get away with, I'm sure. Taxi driver extraordinaire Steve McNamara would agree with you. And Alex says if Russia can influence the world oil price to destabilise President Biden, then it will try to do so. The geopolitics will win out, certainly over the winter period and the midterm US elections, those crucial elections next November 22, of course. And on the Omicron variant, Derek says, do you realise that anagram for Omicron is moronic? You heard it here first on GB News. Plenty of people will be stealing that one from us. Keep your emails coming. Tell me what you want to be discussed on the show. And thanks to everybody for writing to us. Now, this is On the Money, which means it must be time now for my daily interview series. It's Money Talks. Well, my guest today is the co-founder and executive chairman of London Theatre Direct. Francis Hellier set up the online ticketing services company with his friend Emmanuel Ciolfi in 1999, quite a few years ago, and they had only one laptop between them. These two men created one of the UK's leading ticket agencies and distributors. It's a story of determination and resilience, as London Theatre Direct has sought to grow its market share in this highly competitive market. I'm delighted to say that many of my Money Talks interviews are on the GB News app, on the GB News YouTube channel, and on my podcast, Money Talks, available on any decent podcast platform. And we're going to add this one too, because Francis Hellier joins me now. I'm delighted to say, Francis, great to see you.
Liam, hi.
Just in time. So, my God, you started a company in 1999. You must have been a child.
We went far from it, to be honest. Yeah, there was this crazy thing called the internet that we'd read about. It sounded really exciting at the time.
It would never catch on.
Wouldn't catch on. And my best friend and I were sort of thinking what we could actually do. It seemed like a good tool, a good vehicle through which we could sell something. He had access to theatre tickets, and so I had a bit of coding knowledge, and we put something together, and it sort of took off from there.
So tell me how your business works and what it was like in the early days when there was just two of you with a laptop and a kitchen table.
Well, it was
and
slow.
lots of coffee, I presume.
Yeah, it was slow. I mean, I think that trying to persuade people back then that the internet was a viable platform and not something that was criminal. As I suppose today people think of cryptocurrency or blockchain. They don't quite understand.
Bitcoin, things like that, yeah. They kind of know it's there, but...
Yeah, they know it's there, but they also think it's something very different and therefore perhaps shouldn't be trusted. So I think it took a long time, particularly in our field, in our industry, to persuade people that this new technology was a way to sell more tickets, effectively.
Now, your company, do you sell tickets only for theatre in London, or do you sell them for regional theatre too? And what happened to your sales during lockdown? Presumably they went to zero, given that all theatres were closed.
Well, the first part, we do sell tickets for regional theatres in the UK now. So that's something we've developed through the pandemic. But yeah, it's been an absolute nightmare for all live entertainment. It's been really challenging, as you can imagine. We went from sort of having a year and a half of advanced bookings in the system to having to sort of refund and cancel all of those in a very short space of time. So like everything, what we always did is really turn to technology to find a solution, because again, we don't have a particularly big team. So we tried to find lots of methods by which we could keep as much money within the productions themselves, offer customers alternatives such as booking future dates.
Right.
But again, the uncertainty around when we would reopen, we tried to reopen a few times. Of course, it didn't really work out as planned. Now, however, sales have been very strong. So we're in a good position. At the moment, of course, we're not quite sure what's going to happen with the new wave, but let's see how it goes. It's still looking very good for Christmas.
So your company's obviously survived. You've been around for 22 years now. That's quite a long time.
Yeah.
Many other companies have tried to, frankly, flog theatre tickets on the internet. Why have you guys survived? What's different? And what kind of market share do you now have?
Well, I've always been a big fan of disruption and innovation. So where we could, we've always used technology as our way through. We're one of the first companies to connect directly into the box office system through API, it's called. I'm trying to find new methods of getting those tickets sold, but also putting the customer first, making sure that the customer journey is efficient as possible, and offering them new tools of payment, for example, Amazon Pay or Google Pay, that sort of thing. And presenting live interactive seating plans so people can choose exactly where they want to sit. So that didn't happen before the innovations that we sort of created.
And what kind of market share do you now have? It sounds to me like it must be quite a competitive business, but it stands or falls on access to those box offices across London's theatre land and the regional theatres too.
We make up a good chunk of it. I think because of the pandemic, we're not quite sure where we stand at the moment. But people, of course, do go directly to the theatres. But I think what we do is we consolidate access. We're able to show all the different products available. So that's why people feel confident in what we offer.
So presumably tickets cost a little bit more via London Theatre Direct than they would be if you went to, you know, one of the famous theatres directly, whether in London or elsewhere in the UK.
That's absolutely true. So some of the tickets may be slightly more expensive, some might be more reasonable booking through London Theatre Direct. So it's a balance, really.
And what would you say to those people who don't go to the theatre? The theatre is still kind of, you know, lots of people are in school plays and so on, but it's still not seen as something for everyone in this country, is it? Just like classical music and the opera. What would you say to those who think perhaps the theatre's a bit highbrow, it's not for them, or I'd rather just go and see a movie, or maybe I'll just sit at home and watch a movie?
Well, I mean, I think my view is always give it a shot, you know, try something new always. I think there's lots of, what's really exciting at the moment, there's lots of new productions like Six the Musical and Juliet, which are bringing in new audiences, younger audiences into theatre. And of course, we've got great things like Back to the Future, for example. So you have that connection between the movie and seeing on stage, and that's a great show as well.
Now, I'm a Londoner, as you can hear, but I travel around the UK a lot, and whenever I talk to people involved with theatre, particularly people my age and a bit older, actors, they always say that they got their break in regional theatre, they got their break in rep, and they say that regional theatre now is declining. Obviously, all theatre got hammered during the pandemic. Tell us about the state of regional theatre in this country.
Well, I think there's actually an opportunity with regional theatre. First of all, it's been very badly hit, and of course, the West End is typically the thing that brings theatre back. The challenge is that there's lots of unsold tickets, and one of our objectives, one of our aims with the business is to try and expand into regional, as I mentioned, but also to try and get more of those tickets sold. Ultimately, pantomimes are one of the big drivers for theatres in the regions. And again, with the uncertainty around the virus, it's been a little bit difficult this year. But one of the platforms we've launched is pantomimes.com. Which we're hoping to build up for a bigger platform for next year. So it's about trying to drive traffic into those venues and trying to give some support to the regional theatres.
That idea of going to a pantomime or a show, a musical, or even just a regular play ahead of Christmas as a treat, I mean, it really is ingrained in our culture, isn't it? So tell us what you're seeing, in all honesty, since Thursday, Friday, and this Omicron shadow has loomed over the British economy and the global economy generally. What does something like that do to sales of theatre tickets?
Well, I think theatre goers have been so desperate to get back that I think that they're also very conscious of the systems in place. Each theatre feels very safe. If you actually go to see a West End show, you'll feel very confident in the measures that each individual theatre's put in place. And I think that the audience are very receptive to that. They feel confident. So the sales at the moment are still holding up. Again, let's see what happens in the news cycle at the moment and see how that pans out.
And if someone buys a theatre ticket and then, obviously we don't want it to happen, but the government decides that we're closing down theatres, God, I really don't want that to happen. What happens to people's money? Do they get it refunded, or would you say to them, well, look, we've got your credit, buy yourself another ticket in the new year?
People can be confident that when they buy tickets, that if that happens, they'll get a full refund, including any booking fees. But we do offer our customers the option to have a voucher where they can redeem it themselves online, and they can actually book for something in the future. I think lots of theatre lovers and theatre fans really do want to support theatre, therefore they tend to take that option.
And just remind us where the UK stands in the sort of global pantheon of drama, live theatre across the world. Are we still a superpower?
Yeah, we are,
Is London's Theatreland still a massive draw?
Absolutely.
Can our regional theatres, not just in the big cities, Manchester, Sheffield, Leeds and so on, but in smaller cities and towns too, also come in on the coattails of that juggernaut that's London's Theatreland?
I think so. I think it's about stitching up the marketplace. I think it is about providing the option to book not just for London, but book for regional theatre as well. It's not just about London separating the regions. We need to provide platforms that people can choose wherever they are. They can go and see those shows.
Well, Francis, it's been good to talk to you. London Theatre Direct. Best of luck with your business and stay in touch, and we'll get you back another time.
Thank you so
on
much.
The Money to give us an update about how the theatre industry's doing here in the UK.
Thank you for your time.
All the very best. So that was Francis Hellier, the co-founder and executive chairman of London Theatre Direct. And for fans of my interview series Money Talks, you can find a whole host of conversations with major players from the world of business and finance. Listen to them now via the GB News app, the GB News YouTube channel, or my Money Talks podcast, available on all good podcast apps. You've been watching On The Money with me, Liam Halligan. Every weekday at 1 p.m, I bring you your daily dose of economics, business and consumer news. So join me at 1 p.m. tomorrow, or catch up with previous episodes via that GB News app. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you next time. This is GB News. I'm Liam Halligan, and that was On The Money.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. It's cold out there. It will be warmer by tomorrow. Most having a dry day today, but there is some wet weather across northwest England, Northern Ireland, and particularly western Scotland, created by this weather front. But it is a warm front, so it is slowly but surely going to introduce milder air. However, out there today, as you probably know, it is pretty cold, despite quite a bit of sunshine across eastern England. One or two showers grazing Norfolk, but they're clearing away. The cloud will continue to increase over the Midlands, and we'll see some drizzly rain on the west coast of Wales, the coast of northwest England, and particularly wet across western Scotland. Some snow likely for a time here over the hills as the breeze picks up. It is a cold day, though, but it is starting to turn milder in the northwest. We may reach double figures late in the day. That rain will continue to track southwards. A bit of snow still mixed in for a time, but turning more to rain as the milder air arrives. Now, before that mild air arrives, there will be a touch of frost through this evening across parts of the south, but by morning time, the milder air is much across the UK, and temperatures will be well above freezing to start Tuesday. It will be a grey start, a fairly dank, drizzly, misty kind of day. The rain fairly persistent across northern and western Scotland. Rain on and off for Northern Ireland, northwest England too. Further south, not much rain, but staying fairly grey for most of the day. But it will, as I said, be an awful lot milder than it is out there today. Temperatures widely up to double figures. Notice some heavier rain coming up to the northwest later on in the day, and the winds picking up as well. That rain will spread across Scotland and Northern Ireland during tomorrow evening, before a band of rain swings across England and Wales during Tuesday night. And that will then reintroduce colder air later this week. So the weather chopping and changing somewhat. We should see some good spells of sunshine, especially on Thursday, but it will be colder by then, before perhaps turning milder again on Friday.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hi, I'm Alistair Stewart, and I really hope that you can join me here on GB News. I've been in this game for 40 years and I've made lots of friends, but I try and reflect what they think about the big stories of the day in conversation with me. That's why we call it Alistair Stewart and Friends, and you're a key part of it as well. I always get inundated with emails and messages and texts, and if they're really good, I play them back to you. 12 till 3 every Saturday and Sunday.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Fridays, Saturdays and Sunday afternoons here on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as my panel and I take on some of the top stories hitting the headlines.
You can look up the statistics.
No, you look it up. I hug everyone. We learn from it and try and move on. That's it. Opinion is at the heart of the show. It's a place for open and frank conversation, but without the fear of cancellation. So join me here on GB News on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons between 4 and 6 p.m.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comic